Today is the 12th of Tishrei, and we are beginning chapter 137 in the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, discussing the laws of taking the four species that we mentioned in the last chapter. Last chapter discussed the laws of how to find a valid one, what constitutes a valid or kosher lulav, esrog, hadas, and rava. In this chapter, we talk about how to use them. We'll be doing paragraphs 1 through 7. So paragraph 1. We already mentioned that the way that you bind the lulav, the palm branch, to the hadassim and the ravas, to the myrtle branches and the willow branches, is that you hold the lulav with the spine facing towards you, the 3 myrtle branches go on the right, and the 2 willow branches go on the left. The way to do the mitzvah of lulav and esrog is by holding them together in the same manner that they grow. We have to be holding them upright, not upside down. So the way that the esrog grows is with what we call the pitum facing up. The stem where it's attached to the tree and it's cut off, you can sometimes see the little cut over there, that's the stem, that should be towards the bottom, and the other end will sometimes have a little crown that might looks a bit like a clove. So that's in Hebrew is called the pitum. That's supposed to be facing up. But we have a rule that whenever we make a bracha on a mitzvah, we make the bracha right before we do the mitzvah. So the mitzvah is to hold the lulav and esrog together. The lulav you hold in your right hand, the esrog in the left hand. But if you pick them up, you already did the mitzvah. So what we do is we pick up the esrog upside down. So again, the lulav bundle attached with the myrtle branches and the willow branches you pick up in your right hand. The esrog, the citron, you pick up upside down with the pitum facing the ground and the stem facing the top. You're holding it upside down. And now when you're holding it, you then make the blessing on thank you God for this mitzvah of shaking the lulav and the esrog. You can find this blessing either in your Sukkos prayer book, your Sukkos machzor, or you can find it in the Art School Siddur on page 630. So you make that blessing. Thank you God for this mitzvah of taking the lulav. If it's the first day, we have a second blessing that we make. The blessing of Shehechiyanu, V'kimanu v'hiyanu l'zman hazeh. Thank you, God, for bringing me to this day where I have the opportunity once more on the yearly cycle to do this mitzvah of taking lulav and esrog. We only make that second blessing on day number 1. After we make the blessings, we then flip the esrog upside down so that the pitum is facing up and the stem is facing down. This is now the correct way to actually do the mitzvah. We then wave this lulav and esrog holding them together. Again, the lulav in our right hand, the esrog in our left hand. We wave them in all 6 directions. We face the east and we wave it east in front of us, south to the right of us, west behind us, north to the left. Then we shake it, we wave it up, facing up, and then we wave it down. When we wave it in those different directions to give it a little shake, trying to get a little bit of a sound, the top of the lulav, the leaves clap together, trying to get a little bit of a sound out of it. Even if no sound happens, you still did the mitzvah. You got to make sure that when you're holding lulav and esrog that you're touching the lulav bundled together with the hadas and ravas, you're touching it to the esrog. They're supposed to be touching each other, so you're taking them all at once. Paragraph 2. What we said so far was for a righty. A lefty picks up the lulav set, that lulav bundle with the hadas and the ravas. He holds that in his left hand. Again, nothing changing about which the myrtle branches being on the right, the willow branches on the left, that stays. You hold the lulav in your left hand with the myrtle branches on the right of the lulav, the willow branches on the left of the lulav, and in your right hand, you hold the esrog. And just like the righty, you begin with the pitum facing down, the stem facing up, you make the blessings, and then you flip it upside down prior to waving them. Paragraph 3. On Chol HaMoed, the intermediary days, again, the first 2 days of Sukkot, outside Israel at least, are like full-fledged holidays, and therefore we are not wearing tefillin. The remaining 5 days are intermediary days. They're still Sukkot, but we don't have the regular restrictions of Shabbos and a full-fledged holiday. Therefore, some people have the custom to wear tefillin. Others don't wear tefillin on those intermediary days. But if your custom is to wear tefillin, you should take off tefillin before shaking lulav and esrog. The concern is that the tefillin straps that are wrapped around your hand will become an interposition between your hand and the lulav and esrog. Your hands have to be touching the lulav and esrog directly without anything in between them. Paragraph 4. On the days of Sukkot, we recite a prayer after Shemona Esrei in the morning service after the Amidah, called Hallel, thanking God, special praises to God. We say Hallel also on other special days on the calendar. We say it every Rosh Chodesh, the first day of the Jewish month. We say it on Chanukah, on Pesach, on Shavuos, a lot of different times, and we say it on Sukkot as well. During Hallel, we were supposed to hold the lulav and esrog as we recite Hallel, and there are times during Hallel where we wave the lulav and esrog in all 6 directions, just as we did right after we made the blessings on them. If you're reciting Hallel, then just make sure to follow the instructions in the siddur, in the prayer book, about how to wave the lulav and esrog and at what words, what lines to wave it at. Paragraph 5. Shaking lulav and esrog is such a special mitzvah that one is not supposed to eat before doing it. If you don't have lulav and esrog, and you're going to be getting one later in the day, either your own set you're going to get later, or you're going to be borrowing from a friend, then really you're not supposed to eat anything until you actually get your hands on that lulav and esrog and make the blessing and shake them. However, we are not supposed to fast on the holiday of Sukkot, and on any holiday, past chatzos, past halachic midday. So if you're not going to get it until the afternoon, then once chatzos comes, before halachic midday comes, you should start eating. Also, somebody who is weak is able to eat something as well, but it shouldn't be a whole proper meal until you've had a chance to shake the lulav and esrog. And just to clarify, this rule of not eating before shaking lulav and esrog only applies to men, not to ladies, because men have an obligation to take lulav and esrog every day of Sukkot. Ladies, because if you remember, we talked about the sukkah, that positive time-bound mitzvahs ladies are exempt from. If they take lulav and esrog, it's a great mitzvah. It's fantastic. But because they're not obligated to do it, then they're able to eat before doing it. One other thing to note is that you may see some people take the lulav and esrog out to shake it inside the sukkah when they make the blessing on it in the morning. That is a pretty widespread custom, and it's the idea of taking the 2 mitzvahs of Sukkot, the sukkah and lulav and esrog, and bring them together. If that's your custom, great. If it's not, you don't have to worry about it. You can make the blessing on lulav and esrog and take it, shake it wherever you are. Paragraph 6. It's important to try to keep the lulav and the hadassim and the ravos, the myrtle and the willow branches fresh. The lulav stays fresh pretty easily, but it seems like in the times of the Talmud, the weather was so hot in Babylonia, where the Jews lived, that they would have to keep the lulav in water to keep it fresh and moist. Also, the myrtle branches and the aravas, the willow branches, they'd keep in water. Normally, on holidays and on Shabbos, you're not allowed to put vegetative things in water. You can't put flowers in water on Shabbos or Yom Tov, even if they're cut. It's a rabbinical decree that you might end up planting them. And planting something on Shabbos is biblically prohibited. However, in order to keep the lulav and the hadassim and ravos fresh, then the rabbis who made the decree, they relaxed this decree and said that if it was in water before the holiday began, you could put it back in water on the holiday. Now this means the first 2 days of Sukkot, which are full-fledged holidays and have all the regular restrictions of holidays and almost all the restrictions of Shabbos. The intermediary days, of course, you could put it into water, and on the contrary, it's the Tishrei says you should change the water to keep the water fresh. Nowadays, generally speaking, we don't have to worry about putting our lulav in water. It will stay fresh regardless. But it is a good idea to wrap the hadassim and aravos, when you finish with the lulav, slip them off the lulav and wrap them in a wet paper towel or inside foil with a little bit of water in it and stick it in the fridge to keep it fresh. And you could do that on the first 2 days of Sukkot and Chol HaMoed, the intermediary days as well. Paragraph 7. This gets a little technical. The rule of paragraph 7 is pretty simple and straightforward. The reason is technical. So let's start with the rule. We are not allowed to smell the myrtle branches all 7 days of Sukkot. The myrtle branches we have for the mitzvah of shaking lulav and esrog, and therefore they're set aside for that mitzvah. We're not supposed to get any enjoyment from it. It's set aside for the mitzvah. Lulavs and willow branches don't have smells at all, so there's no discussion about smelling them. But what about the esrog? So the rule with the esrog is that you could, on Shabbos, you could smell the esrog. Before smelling it, there's a bracha, a blessing that we make. Just like when we eat food, there's a blessing we make before food. Many smells, many scents, before we smell the objects that have these scents, we make a blessing on them. The most famous one is by Havdalah on Saturday night, that we make a blessing on the spices. So there's a blessing that you make on an esrog before you smell an esrog, which is, thank you God, Hanosin Reach Tov Baperos, who puts good smells into fruits. So that's on Shabbos. But on non-Shabbos days, one really should not be smelling the esrog. Technically, one is allowed to smell the esrog. We can't smell the hadas, but the esrog you could smell. Why? Here's the technical part. The primary function of a hadas, myrtles have no taste. What's a myrtle here for? What's the function of a myrtle branch? It's for smell. So therefore, this myrtle branch is set aside for a mitzvah. You can't get benefit from the primary function of the myrtle. However, the primary function of an esrog, of a citron, is to eat, not to smell. So therefore, we're not allowed to eat it on Sukkot, but the secondary function, the smelling, that we are allowed to do on Sukkot and on Shabbos. But really, we should not be smelling it on the non-Shabbos days of Sukkot. And here's another technical reason why. Since this esrog, this citron, is set aside for the mitzvah of shaking lulav and esrog, according to many opinions, you don't make a blessing on smelling it. Everyone agrees, technically you're allowed to smell it, but there's a disagreement. If you do smell it, do you make a blessing or not during the weekday days of Sukkot? In other words, the non-Shabbos days. It's here to do a mitzvah with, not to smell. So even if you're smelling it, according to many opinions, you don't make a blessing on that smell. And therefore, to get out of this question, this quandary, do you make a blessing or don't make a blessing? The halacha is just don't smell it at all on the non-Shabbos days of Sukkot. On Shabbos, however, and for this you need to take your fist, you stick out your thumb and you stick it down and pick it up as if you're like digging something out. That's the yeshivish thumb. However, on Shabbos, we're going to see that on Shabbos we don't shake lulav and esrog. Therefore, on Shabbos, there's no mitzvah of taking the esrog, at least not rabbinically, we refrain from it. So this esrog has no other function on Shabbos, and now, if you smell it, everyone agrees you make a blessing. Therefore, there's no problem of making that blessing. Thank you God for putting these amazing nice smells, in pleasant smells, in fruits, and then you make that blessing and you can smell the esrog, the citron. Two other Shabbos notes. The lulav and the myrtle and the willow are muksa on Shabbos. We do not move them on Shabbos. They have no Shabbos function. We have them for the mitzvah, and we don't shake lulav and esrog today, and therefore they're muksa. We can't move them on Shabbos. The esrog, however, is not muksa because it's something you could smell. So the esrog you are allowed to move on Shabbos. One more Shabbos note, says the Tishrei Aruch, is that if you have a very fragrant object, in this case we're talking about esrog, on Shabbos you're not allowed to wrap it in fabric, because that's called creating a scent within the fabric. The fabric will absorb some of the scent of the esrog. On some level, that's like creating a new scent in this fabric. You can't do that normally on Shabbos. However, if you took your esrog out of the box, most esrogs come in a box these days with foam. It used to be, if you remember the olden days, they had like some sort of flax wrapped around it. So that flax or that foam, the foam that's in the box, already absorbed the smell of the esrog from before. Therefore, there's no problem returning an esrog to the box, into the foam on Shabbos itself. This is not creating a new scent in that foam. This is just maybe adding more scent to the foam, but it's not creating something new. This brings us to the end of today's learning. Have a wonderful day and see you tomorrow.